The champagne flute exploded against the marble wall glass and gold spraying across the ballroom, and 300 people stopped breathing at the same time. Claire Whitmore, the woman who never raised her voice, the CEO half of Seattle called the Iron Queen. Behind her back stood frozen in the middle of her own victory party, her hand still shaking, her phone glowing face up on the floor beside a puddle of wine. 90 seconds earlier, she'd closed the biggest deal in the company's history. Then one phone call took away the only thing that ever mattered to her. And the only man in that entire room who stepped toward her instead of backing away was the single father she'd spent 4 years pretending not to see. Here's what none of them understood that night. The man who caught her was about to lose everything he had, and the woman everyone feared was about to learn that the person quietly protecting her all along was the last man in that building anyone would have guessed. Before we go further, do me a favor. Drop the name of the city you're watching from in the comments so I can see how far this story has traveled tonight. And if you believe a good man's worth isn't measured by his paycheck, hit that subscribe button and stay with me all the way to the end. Trust me, you'll want to see how this one finishes. Ethan Carter had learned a long time ago that nobody claps for the man who keeps the lights on. He was 38 years old, and he had spent the last 11 of those years at Meridian Systems, a tech company that took up 9 floors of a glass tower in downtown Seattle. His title was Operations Manager. His real job, the one that never made it onto any slide in any meeting, was making sure that everything worked while other men took the credit. That night, the whole company was celebrating. They'd landed the Halverson contract, $300 million, the largest deal Meridian had ever signed. There were speeches. There was an open bar. There were executives in suits that cost more than Ethan made in a month, shaking hands and slapping backs and telling each other how brilliant they all were. And Ethan stood near the back of the ballroom, holding a glass of soda water, checking his watch. Not because he wasn't proud. He'd built half of the operational framework that made the Halverson deal possible. He'd stayed until 2 in the morning for 3 weeks straight, fixing the logistics that a dozen visionaries couldn't be bothered to understand. He knew what he'd done. He checked his watch because it was already 9:15, and Mrs. Alvarez, 2 doors down, had said she could only watch Noah until 10, and Noah had a math test in the morning, and Ethan had promised he'd be home to help him study the multiplication tables one more time. Carter. Ethan turned. It was Doug Prentice, a senior VP, red-faced from the bar, a glass of scotch sweating in his hand. Doug. Big night, huh? Big night. Doug leaned in like they were old friends, which they were not. You know, I was just telling the board that operations really came through on this one. That's kind of you. It's the truth. It's the truth. Doug tapped him on the chest with 2 fingers. You keep your head down, you do good work, people notice. People notice, Carter. Ethan smiled the smile of a man who had heard this exact speech in some form for 11 years running. I appreciate that, Doug. Anyway, Doug had already spotted someone more important over Ethan's shoulder. Great work, great work. And he was gone. People notice. Ethan set his glass down on a passing tray. In 11 years, exactly one person at Meridian had ever noticed him for real. And she was standing across the room right now, cornered by a semicircle of men in expensive suits, nodding at whatever they were saying, her back straight as a fence post, her face a perfect mask. Claire Whitmore. She was 35, which made her one of the youngest CEOs of a company that size in the entire Pacific Northwest. She had taken over Meridian 4 years ago, when it was bleeding money and half the industry had already written its obituary. She'd fired the deadweight, restructured everything, bet the whole company on a direction nobody else believed in, and she'd been right. She was always right. That was what people said about her. That was what they feared about her. Ethan had been in the room the day she took over. He remembered the first thing she ever said to him. He'd been carrying a box of server documentation down a hallway, and she'd stopped him. This new CEO everyone was terrified of, and asked, "You're Carter Operations?" "Yes, ma'am." "You wrote the migration protocol on the Denton account." He'd been so surprised he almost dropped the box. "You read that?" "I read everything," she'd said. "It's the only competent thing I've seen come out of this building all week. Don't let anyone talk you out of doing it your way." And then she'd walked off, And Ethan had stood in that hallway holding his box, thinking that maybe this place wasn't a complete waste of a life after all. That was 4 years ago. In 4 years, they'd never had a single conversation that wasn't about work. That was the rule, and both of them knew it. She was the CEO. He was a mid-level manager raising a kid on a manager's salary. There was a wall between those two facts, and it was a wall neither of them had ever tried to climb. But he watched her. He couldn't help it. He watched the way she stood at the center of every room, while somehow being completely alone in it. He watched the way she never let anyone finish a sentence for her, never let anyone see her flinch, never once in 4 years let anyone catch her looking tired. She looked tired now. Ethan noticed, because he was probably the only person there still sober enough to notice, and because he'd spent 4 years learning the difference between Claire Whitmore's public face and the flicker of the real one underneath. She was laughing at something one of the board members said, but her eyes weren't in it. Her shoulders had dropped a half-inch lower than usual. She kept touching the stem of her wine glass but not drinking from it. He checked his watch again. 9:22. He'd say his goodbyes to a few people and slip out. Nobody would notice he was gone. Nobody ever did. That was when her phone rang. He wouldn't have thought anything of it. People's phones rang all the time, but he happened to be looking right at her when she glanced down at the screen, and he saw something cross her face that he had never seen there before in 4 years. Fear, just for a half second, then the mask again. She excused herself from the circle of men, "Give me one moment, gentlemen," and turned toward the wall of tall windows, phone pressed to her ear, one hand coming up to cover her other ear against the noise of the party. Ethan wasn't trying to listen. He was too far away to hear anyway. But he watched. He watched her go very, very still. He watched her free hand slowly lower from her ear and come to rest flat against the cold glass of the window, as if she suddenly needed something to hold her up. He watched her lips move just a few words he couldn't tell what, and then she stood there unmoving her back to the party, her reflection ghosting in the dark window, while somewhere on the other end of that line, a voice was taking apart something inside her that no boardroom ever could. And Ethan, standing 40 feet away with his car keys already in his hand, did something he would think about for the rest of his life. He stayed. He didn't leave. He didn't say his goodbyes. He didn't go home to help Noah with his multiplication tables. He stood there, and he watched the most powerful woman he'd ever known come apart at the seams in a room full of people too drunk and too self-absorbed to see it happening. When she finally lowered the phone, her hand was shaking. He saw her look down at the wine glass in her other hand. He saw her knuckles go white around the stem. And then Claire Whitmore, who never raised her voice, who never lost control, who had spent 4 years making sure no one at Meridian Systems ever saw her as anything but perfect, turned and threw that glass as hard as she could against the marble wall. The crash cut through the whole party like a gunshot. 300 people stopped talking at once. For one long, terrible second, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The music kept playing cheerful and obscene over a room gone absolutely silent. Everyone was staring at Claire, and Claire was staring at the shattered glass on the floor, and her chest was heaving, and her carefully applied makeup was streaked with tears she hadn't even known were falling. And then the whispering started. That low, ugly hiss of a crowd that has just watched someone fall. "Did you see that? Is she drunk? The CEO just... Somebody get a photo." Ethan moved before he made the decision to move. He crossed that ballroom in about 6 seconds, cutting straight through the frozen crowd, and by the time anyone else had even thought about reacting, he was already there, already standing between Claire and 300 pairs of staring eyes, already turning his back to the room so that his shoulders blocked their view of her face. "Ms. Whitmore," he said quietly. Calm, steady, like nothing at all was wrong. "The car's ready when you are." Claire looked up at him. Her eyes were wrecked. She didn't know what car he was talking about. There was no car. He was making it up on the spot. But she understood what he was offering. A way out. A reason to leave. A story other than she fell apart. "Yes," she said, and her voice barely worked. "Yes, thank you, Carter." He put a hand lightly at her elbow, not gripping, just guiding, and he walked her toward the doors and to the 300 people watching it. looked for all the world like a competent employee, escorting a busy executive who'd received urgent news and needed to leave. He held his head up. He kept his pace even. He made it look like the most normal thing in the world. Behind them, Doug Prentice found his voice. All right, folks. Let's get back to it. Congratulations again, everybody. Drinks are on the company." The music swelled. The party swallowed the moment whole, and Ethan Carter walked the Iron Queen of Seattle out into the night. The elevator doors closed, and it was just the two of them. And the second they were alone, Claire's whole body seemed to fold inward. She pressed her back against the mirrored wall of the elevator and slid down about 6 inches before she caught herself. Hey, I've got you." Ethan turned to face her. You're okay. I'm not." She pressed the heel of her hand against her mouth. God, what did I just do? In front of the entire—" She squeezed her eyes shut. "The entire company just watched me. They watched you get bad news and leave. That's all they saw. You don't have to do that." "Do what?" "Manage me." She laughed, but it came out broken. "That's what you do, isn't it, Carter? You manage things. You clean up messes other people make." She opened her eyes and looked at him, and there was something raw and furious in her face. "Well, I'm the mess tonight. Congratulations." Ethan didn't flinch. "Where are you parked?" "What?" "Your car. Where's your car?" "Level 3. But I'm not." She shook her head. "I'll call my driver." "Your driver's off tonight. You gave everyone the night off. Said the company deserved to celebrate." He'd heard her say it that afternoon. He remembered everything she said. "You're not driving. Not like this." "I'm perfectly capable of—" "Ms. Whitmore." He said it gently, but he didn't back down. "You've had 3 glasses of wine, and you just got a phone call that put you on the floor of an elevator. You're not driving." The elevator dinged. Level 3. The doors opened onto the dim, empty parking garage. Claire didn't move. She stood there against the mirror, and Ethan watched the fight drain out of her all at once, the way it does when a person has been holding themselves together for so long that the moment someone offers to hold them, instead, they simply can't stand up anymore. "He got married," she said. Ethan went still. "That's who called. I don't even know what to call him. The man I was going to—" She stopped, started again. "4 years ago, when I took this job, he told me to choose him or the company. And I chose the company because I thought I could have both later. I thought there'd be time." A tear slid down her cheek, and she didn't wipe it away. "He got married last month. In Napa. He didn't even tell me. His sister just called to ask if I'd gotten the announcement, because she felt bad because everyone assumed I already—" Her voice cracked completely, and she put her face in her hands. Ethan had been in the room for a lot of hard moments in his life. He'd sat beside his wife's hospital bed for 8 months. He'd told a 5-year-old that his mommy wasn't coming home. He knew what real grief sounded like, and he knew there was nothing you could say to fix it. So he didn't try. He just reached out and very carefully put one hand on her shoulder. "Come on," he said quietly. "Let me take you home. You shouldn't be alone tonight, and you sure as hell shouldn't be behind the wheel." She looked up at him over her fingers. "Why do you even care?" she whispered. It wasn't cruel. It was genuine. Like she truly could not understand it. "You barely know me. I'm your boss. I've probably made your life miserable 100 times without even knowing your kid's name." "Noah," Ethan said. "His name's Noah. He's 8. Claire blinked. "And you're not making my life miserable," Ethan went on. "You're the only person in that whole building who ever told me my work was worth a damn. 4 years ago, in a hallway. I was carrying a box." He almost smiled. "You probably don't remember." "The migration protocol," she said. He stared at her. "The Denton account," Claire said, wiping her face with the back of her hand, and for 1 second, one flicker of a second, the ghost of the real Claire looked out from behind the ruins of the mask. "I told you not to let anyone talk you out of doing it your way." Ethan didn't say anything for a moment. He couldn't. "You remember that," he finally said. "I told you." She pushed herself up off the mirror, unsteady but standing. "I read everything." He got her into the passenger seat of his 11-year-old Honda Accord, and if the sight of that car, the child's booster seat in the back, the crayon marks on the door panel, the crack in the dashboard, he'd never had the money to fix, meant anything to Claire Whitmore. She didn't say so. She just buckled her seatbelt with the exhausted care of someone very drunk, trying very hard to seem sober, and she stared out the windshield, and she gave him her address in a neighborhood full of houses that cost more than Ethan would earn in 3 lifetimes. He pulled out of the garage into the Seattle rain. For a while, neither of them said anything. The wipers thumped. The city slid by, all wet neon and empty crosswalks. "You have a son," Claire said eventually. "I do. And a wife." Ethan kept his eyes on the road. "I did. She passed 6 years ago." "Oh." A long pause. "I'm sorry. I didn't." "It's all right. You couldn't have known." What was her name? Nobody at Meridian had asked him that in 6 years. Nobody. He'd worked in that building for 11 years, and no one had ever asked him his dead wife's name. "Sarah," he said, and it came out rougher than he expected. "Sarah," Claire repeated softly, like she was setting it down somewhere safe. How old was Noah when she... 2. He doesn't really remember her. He's got a couple of pictures. He keeps them by his bed. Ethan changed lanes. "I tell him stories about her so he'll know who she was. But he doesn't remember. Sometimes I think that's a mercy, and sometimes I think it's the cruelest thing in the world." Claire was quiet. "Look at us," she said finally, and there was something almost like a laugh in it. "The CEO who got jilted and the widower. 2 of the most successful put-together people at Meridian Systems." She let her head fall back against the seat. "What a pair of frauds we are." Ethan glanced over at her. In the passing light of the street lamps, without the boardroom, without the 300 people watching, without the mask, she just looked like a tired, sad woman who'd had a terrible night. Not the Iron Queen. Not the youngest CEO in the Pacific Northwest. Just a person. "You're not a fraud," he said. "You don't know me, Carter. Maybe not. But I know that when your whole world went sideways in front of 300 people tonight, you got up and you walked out with your head high even though you were dying inside. That's not a fraud." He turned onto the freeway. "That's the strongest thing I've seen anybody do in a long time." She didn't answer. When he looked over again, she was crying quietly. This time, no drama, just tears running down her face while she stared out the window at the rain. And Ethan had the sense that this was the first time in a very long time that anyone had said something kind to Claire Whitmore and actually meant it. The problem announced itself the moment they turned onto her street. There were lights, red and blue flashing off the wet pavement. 3 fire trucks. A cluster of people in bathrobes standing out in the rain. And where Claire's building should have been a sleek modern high-rise all glass and steel, there was smoke pouring out of the 4th floor, and hoses and men in helmets and yellow tape stretched across the entrance. "Oh my God," Claire breathed, sitting up. That's my floor. That's my floor." Ethan pulled the car over. A firefighter was already walking toward them, waving them back. "You can't park here, folks. You gotta keep it moving." Claire had her window down before he finished. "I live here. 4th floor, Unit 4C. What happened is everyone. You're a resident." The firefighter's face shifted. "Ma'am, I'm gonna need you to talk to my captain, but I'll be straight with you. Electrical fire started in 4B, spread fast. Nobody's hurt, thank God everybody got out. But the 4th floor took heavy damage, and the whole building's got no power, no water, and a lot of smoke. Nobody's going back inside tonight. Probably not for a few nights. You got somewhere you can stay." Claire opened her mouth, closed it, and Ethan watched the reality land on her all at once. It was almost 11 at night. She was drunk, and she was devastated, and now she had no home to go to. Every hotel downtown would be booked solid because of a conference in town. That weekend, he happened to know that because operations had tried to book rooms for the Halverson team and come up empty. Her assistant was off. Her driver was off. Her friends, did she even have friends? In 4 years, he'd never once heard her mention one. Her family lived across the country, and the one man she might have called in a crisis had just gotten married in Napa without telling her. Claire Whitmore, The most powerful woman he knew had nowhere to go. "I'll figure something out," she said to the firefighter. And even now, even in the wreckage of the worst night of her life, she said it with her chin up. "Thank you. I'll call around." She rolled the window back up. Ethan pulled the car forward out of the way and stopped again half a block down. The rain drummed on the roof. "You can call around all you want," he said. "There's not a room in this city tonight. The Global Systems Conference booked out every hotel from here to the airport. I know because we tried." "Then I'll sleep in the office. There's a couch in—" "You're going to sleep on an office couch, alone, tonight, after everything that's happened. I've slept there before. I don't doubt it." Ethan drummed his fingers on the wheel. He knew what he was about to say, and he knew every reason he shouldn't say it. She was his boss. She was his boss, and his apartment was a 2-bedroom walk-up in a working-class neighborhood, and his kid was asleep, and there was crayon on the walls, and the couch had a spring coming through, and if a single soul at Meridian ever found out that Claire Whitmore had spent the night at his place, both their lives would turn into a headline. "I knew all of that. He said it anyway. Come stay at my place tonight." Claire turned and stared at him. It's nothing like what you're used to," he said quickly. "It's small, it's old. My kid's asleep, so we'd have to be quiet. But there's a spare room. It's Noah's playroom. But there's a pull-out and the door locks, and it's warm and it's dry, and you won't be alone. And in the morning, I'll drive you wherever you need to go, and nobody will ever know you were there. You have my word." "Carter, I can't." "Why not?" "Because you're my employee." She said it like it explained everything, and to be fair, it did. "Do you have any idea what people would say, what they'd do with that? There are men on my board who would kill for a reason to—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. "I can't put you in that position, and I can't put myself in it either." "Then we don't tell anyone," Ethan said simply. "It's a place to sleep, that's all it is. You're a human being who needs a safe place for one night, and I've got one. The board doesn't get a say in that. Nobody does." The rain fell. The wipers had stopped. The windshield blurred over with water until the city outside was just smears of light. Claire looked at this man, this operations manager, she'd exchanged maybe 50 sentences with in 4 years, this widower with a booster seat in his back seat and crayon on his car door. This man who had crossed a ballroom to stand between her and 300 pairs of eyes, when every single other person she paid a salary to had just stood there and watched her fall. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, for the second time that night. But it sounded different now. Not suspicious. Almost afraid of the answer. Ethan thought about it. He wanted to give her something true. "Because 6 years ago my whole world ended," he said, "and I found out real fast who the people are that step toward you when you're falling and who the people are that step back. There weren't very many who stepped toward me. I remember every single one of them. I'd walk through fire for any of them to this day." He looked at her. "Tonight you're the one falling, and I'm not going to be one of the people who stepped back. That's the whole reason. There isn't another one." For a long moment Claire didn't speak. Then very quietly she said, "Okay. Okay. Okay." She let out a shaky breath and wiped her eyes one more time. "One night. And Carter, if you ever tell a living soul, I won't. I will make the rest of your career a nightmare." Ethan actually smiled. The first real smile of the whole night. There she is. And despite everything, despite the fire and the phone call and the shattered glass and the wreckage of the worst night of her life. Claire Whitmore laughed. Just a little, just once. But it was real. He put the car in drive and pulled back out into the rain, and he took the woman. Everyone in Seattle was afraid of home to his tiny apartment, and neither of them had the first idea that the night wasn't over yet, not by a long way. Mrs. Alvarez was asleep on the couch with the TV murmuring when Ethan let them in. She startled awake, took one look at the elegant red-eyed woman standing behind him in the doorway, and had the good grace not to ask a single question. "How was an angel?" she whispered, gathering her knitting. "Did his multiplication all by himself and everything. Fell asleep around 9:30. Left the light on for you." She patted Ethan's arm on her way past, gave Claire a small warm nod, like she saw women in $1,000 dresses in this building every day of the week and let herself out. The apartment was quiet. A single lamp burned in the corner, and Claire Whitmore stood just inside the door of a stranger's home, still in her party dress, and looked around at a life she had never once imagined. There were crayon drawings taped to the wall by the kitchen, dozens of them. A whole gallery, some of them years old and curling at the edges. There was a small pair of sneakers by the door, laces still tied, kicked off in a hurry. There was a math worksheet on the kitchen table, half-finished, a pencil laid across it, and a note in a child's careful handwriting. "Dad, I got them all. Even the sevens. Wake me up if you want to check. Noah." And there on the little table by the couch, in a cheap frame, a photograph of a young woman with kind eyes, laughing, holding a baby. Claire looked at it for a long time. "That's Sarah," Ethan said quietly, hanging his keys on the hook. "And that's Noah. He was about 8 months there." Claire didn't say anything. She was still looking at the photo, and then at the crayon drawings, and then at the tiny sneakers by the door. And Ethan realized she wasn't seeing a small, shabby apartment at all. She was seeing something she had traded away 4 years ago, standing in an airport choosing a company over a man. She was seeing a home. "You did all this," she said. It wasn't a question. Her voice had gone strange and thick. "By yourself. For 6 years. You raised him, and you kept your job, and you never once let it show at work, and I never in 4 years, I never once asked how you were doing it. I just kept piling more on your desk." She turned to face him, and her composure was cracking again, but this time, it wasn't about the man in Napa at all. "I signed the paychecks, and I never once looked at the lives." God Carter. What kind of person builds a whole company, and never once looks at the lives? "The kind who's carrying something heavy of her own," Ethan said. "You didn't have room to carry everyone else's too. That's not a crime. That's just being a person." She shook her head. "You don't have to be kind to me. You've been kind to me all night. It's exhausting, actually. Nobody's this kind. Not for free. Everybody wants something." "I don't want anything from you, Claire." It was the first time he'd ever used her first name. He heard it come out of his own mouth, and he couldn't take it back. And for a second, the air in the little apartment seemed to change. She heard it too. "The room's back here," Ethan said, quieter now, breaking the moment on purpose, before it could become something. "I'll get you a shirt and some sweats to sleep in. They'll be huge on you, but it's dry at least. Bathroom's on the left. There's a new toothbrush in the cabinet still in the package. Get some rest. I'll have coffee going by 6, and you'll be back downtown before anyone's even at their desk." Claire followed him down the short hall. He pulled a folded t-shirt and a pair of drawstring sweatpants from his dresser and handed them to her, and their hands touched for just a second, and both of them pretended it didn't. "Ethan," she said as he turned to go. He stopped. She'd never used his first name either. 4 years, and they'd both been Carter and Ms. Whitmore, and now, in the space of 2 minutes in the middle of the night, the wall between those two facts had just quietly come down, and neither of them had knocked it over on purpose. It had simply fallen. Yeah, she stood there in this hallway of his home, holding his borrowed clothes. This powerful, brilliant, lonely woman who had lost her home and her past, and very nearly her dignity, all in the space of one evening, and she looked at him like she was trying to solve a problem she didn't have the data for. "Thank you," she said, "for stepping toward me, when everyone else stepped back." Ethan nodded. His throat was tight. "Get some sleep, Claire." He went back to the front room. He didn't sleep much that night. He lay on the couch with the broken spring, listening to the rain and the small sounds of a stranger moving quietly in his son's playroom, and he thought about how a single ordinary night can turn on you without any warning at all. How you can walk into a party, planning to leave early, and help your kid with his multiplication tables, and walk out, having crossed a line you can never uncross. Down the hall. Claire Whitmore lay awake too, in a borrowed shirt that smelled like laundry soap and something clean and warm. She didn't have a name for, staring at the ceiling of a child's playroom, surrounded by crayon drawings and cardboard rocket ships, feeling for the first time in longer than she could remember safe. And in the morning, when the sun came up over Seattle, and 8-year-old Noah Carter padded out of his bedroom in his pajamas to find a strange, beautiful woman sitting at his kitchen table, drinking his dad's coffee. That was when everything, absolutely everything, began to change. Noah Carter stopped dead in the kitchen doorway, one sock on, one sock off his hair, sticking straight up on one side, and he stared at the woman sitting at his table like she might be a dream he hadn't quite finished having. "You're not Mrs. Alvarez," he said. Claire set down the coffee mug. In the daylight, in Ethan's oversized t-shirt with her hair pulled back and no makeup, and eyes still a little swollen from the night before, she looked nothing like the woman 300 people had watched shatter a glass 12 hours ago. She looked younger, uncertain, like she'd forgotten how to talk to a person who wasn't afraid of her. "No," she said. "I'm not. My name's Claire. I work with your dad." Noah considered this with the deep seriousness that only 8-year-olds can bring to a situation. "Did you sleep in my playroom?" "I did. I hope that's okay. There was a fire at my building last night, so your dad let me stay." "A fire?" Noah's whole face lit up with the horrified delight of a child hearing about a disaster that hadn't hurt anyone he knew. "A real one with trucks. 3 trucks. Whoa." He crossed the kitchen and climbed into the chair across from her, apparently deciding on the spot that anyone who'd survived a 3-truck fire was worth having breakfast with. "Did your stuff burn up?" "Some of it, probably. I haven't been able to go back and see yet." "That's really bad," Noah said with genuine sympathy. Then brightening, "You can borrow my dad's stuff. He said you already are." He pointed at the shirt. "That's his." "It is. It's too big for you." "It really is." Noah nodded, like this settled something important, and then Ethan came out of the hallway pulling a sweatshirt over his head, and he saw the two of them sitting there at his kitchen table, his son and his boss talking like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. And something moved through his chest that he didn't have a word for and didn't want to look at too closely. "Bud, you were supposed to wake me up if you wanted to check your math." "I did them all right," Noah said. "Even the 7s, Claire checked." Ethan looked at Claire. "You checked at his multiplication." 7 times 8 is 56, Claire said a little defensively. "I run a company. I can handle 3rd-grade math." "She said it faster than you do," Noah reported. "Everybody says it faster than I do," Ethan said, and Claire almost smiled, and for about 4 seconds, the whole kitchen felt like a place where nothing had gone wrong in anyone's life. Then Ethan checked the clock on the stove, and the 4 seconds were over. "Okay, Noah, teeth and get dressed. The bus is in 20 minutes. Claire, I've got coffee. I've got exactly one kind of cereal, and I've got about a 40-minute window to get you downtown before this turns into a story somebody tells. In that order." "I'll take the coffee and the window," Claire said. "Skip the cereal." "It's the good kind," Noah warned her, sliding off his chair. "It's the one with the marshmallows." "Then I'm deeply sorry to miss it." Noah pointed at her one more time on his way out of the kitchen, a small ambassador delivering a final decree. "You should come back. You're funny." And then he was gone down the hall, and Claire sat very still holding her coffee, staring at the empty doorway he'd left behind. And Ethan watched something crack open behind her eyes that had nothing to do with him at all. "He's a good kid," Claire said. Her voice wasn't quite steady. "He is. You're doing an incredible job with him. I want you to know that. Whatever else happens today, I want you to know I saw this." She gestured vaguely at the crayon drawings, the finished worksheet, the small pair of sneakers by the door. "I saw all of it. And there it was again, that thing that had happened in the car the night before. The sense that she wasn't really talking about Noah, that she was standing at the edge of a life she'd walked away from and looking down into it and measuring the drop." Ethan set a mug down in front of her and didn't say anything because there was nothing to say that wouldn't make it worse, and because he had learned a long time ago that some grief you just have to let people sit inside for a minute. They got Noah on the bus. They got Claire into a baseball cap and a jacket of Ethan's that swallowed her whole, so that when he drove her downtown, she looked like anybody. Like nobody, like a woman who had absolutely not spent the night in her operations manager's apartment. He dropped her 2 blocks from the office at her insistence, and she got out of the car and stood on the curb for a second with her hand on the door. "Ethan?" "Yeah." Last night didn't happen. He understood what she meant. He understood exactly what she meant, and he understood every reason behind it, and he nodded. Last night didn't happen. I mean it. For your sake more than mine. I know you do. She held his eyes for one more second, and then she shut the car door, and she pulled the cap down low, and Claire Whitmore walked away toward the building where 300 people worked for her, and none of them knew where she'd slept. And Ethan sat there at the curb and watched her go, and thought, that's the end of it then. That's the whole thing. It happened, and now it's over. And Monday, it's Carter and Ms. Whitmore again, and that's how it should be. I was wrong, of course. But it would take about 9 days for him to find out how wrong. The thing about a secret is that it doesn't stay the size you make it. It grows in the dark, feeding on the smallest things, and by the end of the first week, the smallest things had already started. It started with the coffee. On Tuesday, a cup of coffee appeared on Ethan's desk. Before he arrived, the exact way he took it, black with 1 sugar, which was not a thing anyone at Meridian knew about him because no one had ever asked. There was no note. He looked around the operations floor, and everyone was heads down at their monitors, and he drank the coffee, and he understood, and he didn't say anything. On Wednesday, a report. He'd been fighting for 8 months to get funded a restructuring of the entire vendor logistics system that would save the company millions, and that 3 VPs had killed 3 separate times because it made their departments look bloated, quietly appeared on the approved list for the next quarter. His manager pulled him aside, baffled, and said, I don't know who you talked to, Carter, but this came down from the top with a note that just said, do it his way. And Ethan had gone very still, because he'd heard those words before 4 years ago, in a hallway from a woman carrying the weight of a dying company. Do it his way. On Thursday, she called him. Not on the office line. On his cell at 9 at night after Noah was asleep, and when he answered, she didn't say hello. She said, I want to be clear that I'm calling about the vendor logistics project. Okay, Ethan said, sitting down slowly on his couch. Because it's a good project, and I approved it on the merits, and that's the only reason I approved it. Understood. There was a long pause on the line. How was his day? Claire asked, and her voice was completely different now, lower, and Ethan closed his eyes. He got 100 on the math test, Ethan said. Every one, even the 7s. He heard her breathe out, and he could picture her exactly alone in some corporate apartment the company had put her up in, a woman worth more money than he'd see in 10 lifetimes, sitting in the dark asking about an 8-year-old's spelling test, because it was the only warm thing she had to hold on to. Tell him I knew he would, Claire said. The 7s are the hard ones. Everybody thinks it's the 9s, but it's the 7s. I'll tell him. They talked for an hour that night. Not about the company, about Noah and about Sarah, and eventually about the man in Napa, whose name turned out to be David, and whom Claire had loved since she was 26, and whom she had chosen against without ever quite believing she was choosing forever. And Ethan listened the way he'd learned to listen at hospital bedsides, and he didn't try to fix any of it. And at the end of the hour, Claire said, "This is a mistake, isn't it?" And Ethan said, "Probably." And neither of them hung up for another 20 minutes. That was the pattern by the end of the second week. The coffee, the quiet approvals, the phone calls after 9. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, without either of them ever deciding, to the 2 loneliest people at Meridian Systems, had become the thing each of them didn't have someone who asked how the day went and actually waited for the answer. But secrets grow in the dark. And the dark at Meridian Systems had a name. His name was Gerald Voss, and he had been on the board of directors for 19 years, and he had wanted to be CEO for 18 of them. He was 61 years old, silver-haired, silver-tongued, and he had watched a 31-year-old woman get handed the job he'd bled for, and he had spent 4 years smiling at her across the boardroom table and waiting for her to make one single mistake he could use. On the Monday of the 3rd week, Gerald Voss got a phone call of his own. Mr. Voss. It was a voice he paid well to stay anonymous. You asked me to keep an eye on Ms. Whitmore's movements, the night of the Halverson party. She didn't go home. Her building had a fire, that part's public. But she didn't check into a hotel, she didn't go to the corporate suite, and the company car log shows her driver was off. She disappeared for about 10 hours. Voss leaned back in his chair. Disappeared where? Working on it. But there's more. Payroll flagged something. A mid-level operations manager named Ethan Carter got a project greenlit last week that 3 VPs had killed. signed off personally by Whitmore. And there've been late-night calls between her cell and his going back 2 weeks. A lot of them. Gerald Voss smiled the way a man smiles when someone hands him exactly the thing he's been waiting 18 years to hold. "Find out where she slept," he said softly. "And find out everything there is to know about Mr. Ethan Carter." That was the twist Ethan and Claire couldn't see coming because they were too busy building something in the dark to notice that the dark was watching them back. And it started to surface the way these things always do, in the smallest and most human of ways. It surfaced in the break room on a Wednesday at 10:40 in the morning. Ethan was refilling his coffee when 2 women from accounting came in behind him, mid-conversation, not realizing he was there, and one of them said, "And I'm just saying, I've never seen her sign off on an ops project that fast. And now Carter's suddenly the golden boy. You tell me what's..." And then she saw him, and the sentence died in her throat, and both women got very interested in the vending machine. Ethan stood there with his coffee. He didn't turn around. He just said quietly, "Morning, Denise. Morning, Pam." And he walked out, and behind him he heard the silence, and he knew. It had started. I didn't tell Claire that night. He almost did. He had the phone in his hand at 9:15, and he sat there while it rang. And when she answered with her usual, "I want to be clear, I'm calling about the vendor project," he heard how tired she was, how much she needed the 1 hour of the day where nothing was falling apart, and he couldn't do it. He asked her about her afternoon instead. He told her Noah had lost a tooth. He let her have the hour. He should have told her. He'd think about that later too, how much easier the whole thing might have been if he'd just told her that night in the second week before it got its hooks in. But he wanted to protect her from it, and wanting to protect someone is exactly how you end up making the worst decisions of your life. The whispers got louder over the next few days. He felt them the way you feel weather coming. Conversations stopped when he walked up. His manager started CCing people on emails that never used to need CCing. Doug Prentice, the VP who'd told him people noticed, stopped saying hello in the elevator. And one afternoon, a young analyst named Kevin, a kid Ethan had mentored for 2 years, cornered him by the printers and said low and urgent, "Ethan, I gotta tell you something because you've always been straight with me. People are talking. Like everybody. They're saying you and Whitmore are, you know. And there's a guy from Voss's office going around asking questions. About you. About your apartment. He asked me if I'd ever seen her car in your neighborhood." Ethan's stomach turned to ice. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I don't know where you live, and it's none of his business," Kevin said. "But Ethan, this is Voss. You know what Voss is. He's not doing this because he cares about workplace policy. He's building something. And whatever it is, you're standing right in the middle of it." That night, Ethan finally told her. He told her all of it. The break room, the printers. Voss's man asking about his neighborhood. And when he finished, there was a silence on the line so long he thought the call had dropped. "Claire. I'm here." Her voice had changed completely. The warmth was gone. In its place was something he'd only ever heard from across a boardroom. The Iron Queen. The woman who never lost. Gerald Voss. "You know him. I've known Gerald Voss was going to try to take this company from me since the day I walked in the door. He's been waiting 4 years for a weapon." She let out a slow breath. "And I just handed him one. God. I handed it to him with a bow on it. Late night calls, a project I fast-tracked a night I can't account for." She stopped. "This is my fault. This is entirely my fault. You did nothing wrong. You gave a grieving woman a place to sleep, and I turned it into the thing that ends your career. It doesn't have to end anything. You don't understand how this works, Ethan." And now she wasn't the woman who asked about the sevens. She was the CEO, and she was doing the thing she did best, which was seeing 4 moves ahead of everyone else and hating every one of them. It doesn't matter what actually happened. It only matters what it looks like. And it looks like the CEO is having an affair with a subordinate and rewarding him with company resources. That's the story. That's a clean, simple, devastating story. And Voss will tell it to the board, and it won't matter that it isn't true, because the board doesn't care about true. They care about scandal and shareholders and their own necks. Her voice cracked just slightly, just once. "They'll use you to get to me. And when they're done with you, they'll throw you away, and you'll never work in this city again. And your son. Leave Noah out of it. I'm not the one dragging him into it. Ethan Voss is, that's the whole point. She caught herself. Breathed. I'm sorry. I finally had one good thing. I had 1 hour a day that didn't hurt, and I should have known better, because every single time I let myself have one good thing, this is what happens to it. Ethan gripped the phone. So what do? We don't do anything, Claire said. I handle it. You stay as far away from me as you can get. Effective immediately. No more calls, no more coffee. If we pass in a hallway, you don't look at me. Voss is looking for a pattern, and the only way to beat him is to make sure there's no pattern to find. Her voice was flat now, professional, and it was somehow worse than tears. I never should have let this happen. It was selfish. I've been leaning on you like you had nothing better to do than absorb my problems, and you've got a child and a career, and I've been so lonely that I just... Claire. Good night, Ethan. Thank you for everything. I mean that. And I'm sorry. And she hung up. Ethan sat on his couch in the dark for a long time. Down the hall, Noah slept one tooth lighter $1 under his pillow, the whole small architecture of the life Ethan had built with his own 2 hands. And Ethan understood sitting there that Claire had just tried to protect that life, the only way she knew how, by cutting herself out of it. By taking the blame and the risk and the loneliness back onto her own shoulders, where she'd carried everything for so long that she'd forgotten a person could set anything down. He also understood that it wasn't going to work. Because Gerald Voss didn't want a pattern. Voss wanted a war. And he'd already decided who the casualties were going to be. He found that out for certain 2 days later on a Friday at 3:15 in the afternoon, when a man he'd never seen before walked onto the operations floor in a gray suit and stopped at his desk. Ethan Carter. That's me. My name's Raymond Sloan. I work with Gerald Voss. The man smiled with no warmth at all and set a business card on Ethan's desk. Mr. Voss would like 10 minutes of your time, privately. He thinks you and he have some interests in common. He paused. He asked me to mention that he's aware of your situation. The single father raising a boy alone on an operations manager's salary. He finds it admirable. He also finds it precarious. Another smile. A man in your position can't afford to make the wrong friends. Mr. Voss would like to be the right one. Ethan looked at the card. He looked at Raymond Sloan. And in that moment he understood that Voss wasn't just planning to use him against Claire. Voss was planning to buy him, to turn him, to make him a witness, to have the grieving widower himself testify that yes, the CEO had spent the night. Yes, she'd fast-tracked his project. Yes, there'd been calls. And the terrible thing, the thing that made Ethan's blood run cold, was that a smart man in his position would take that deal. A smart man with a child to raise and a mortgage and no safety net would take Voss's hand, because Voss was going to win either way, and the only question was which side of the wreckage you wanted to be standing on when the dust cleared. Tell Mr. Voss, Ethan said slowly, that I appreciate the offer, and that I'll think about it. That's all he asks. Sloan tapped the desk. Don't take too long, Mr. Carter. These windows have a way of closing. He left. Ethan sat there holding the business card, and across the operations floor, he could feel the eyes on him, the whole room pretending not to watch, everyone already writing the story in their heads. And he thought about Noah, and he thought about Sarah, and he thought about a woman in an oversized t-shirt checking a third grader's multiplication tables at his kitchen table faster than he could say them himself. That night, he didn't call Claire. She'd told him not to. He honored it. But he didn't sleep either. Because he'd made a decision sitting at that desk with Voss's card in his hand, and it was the kind of decision that changes a man's whole life, and he knew it. I wasn't going to take Voss's deal. And he wasn't going to disappear into the background and let Claire fight this alone, the way she'd fought everything alone for 4 years, for her whole life. He was going to do the one thing his entire career had trained him for, and no one had ever given him credit for. He was going to find out the truth, because here was what Gerald Voss didn't know about Ethan Carter. Voss saw an operations manager, a functionary, a man who kept the lights on. Voss didn't understand that keeping the lights on means you can see every wire in the building. Ethan had spent 11 years in the guts of Meridian Systems. He knew where every vendor contract lived. He knew which numbers were supposed to match and which ones didn't. He knew the difference between a company that was running clean and a company where someone somewhere was moving money in the dark. And for the last several months, in the quiet part of his brain that never turned off, Ethan had been noticing that some of the numbers on the Halverson project didn't match. He'd assumed it was an error. He'd flagged it twice gently and been told twice to leave it alone. Now, sitting in the dark at 2 in the morning, with Voss's business card on the coffee table in front of him, Ethan started to wonder who exactly had told him to leave it alone. And why? And whether the same men who were about to destroy Claire with a story about an affair might have a very good reason to want the CEO gone before anyone looked too closely at where the Halverson money was actually going. He opened his laptop. The screen lit his face in the dark, and Ethan Carter, the man nobody clapped for, the man who kept the lights on, started to read. I was still reading when the sun came up, and what he'd found by then made his hands go cold on the keyboard, because it wasn't an error. It had never been an error, and if he was right about even half of it, then Gerald Voss's plan to destroy Claire Whitmore over a fake affair wasn't really about the affair at all. It was a distraction, a very expensive, very deliberate distraction, and Ethan was the only person in the entire company who'd just figured out what it was distracting everyone from. He closed the laptop. His heart was pounding. Down the hall, Noah's alarm went off, and he heard the small thump of his son's feet hitting the floor. The ordinary Saturday sound of the only thing in the world that mattered more to him than the truth he'd just uncovered. And Ethan sat there caught between the two, understanding with total clarity that the moment he pulled this thread, he wouldn't just be defending Claire. He'd be making the most dangerous enemy of his life, a man with 19 years of power and nothing left to lose. And he'd be doing it with an 8-year-old asleep down the hall and no one to protect either of them if it went wrong. Dad. Noah appeared in the doorway, rubbing his eyes, hair sticking up. Are you already awake? It's Saturday. Ethan looked at his son, and he made the second decision that would change his whole life in the space of a week. Yeah, bud, he said, and he was surprised at how steady his voice came out. I'm already awake. You want pancakes? With the chocolate chips. With the chocolate chips. Noah grinned and padded off toward the kitchen, and Ethan sat for one more second, with his hand resting on the closed laptop, on the truth that was going to blow the whole company apart. And he thought about the woman who'd told him 4 years ago not to let anyone talk him out of doing it his way. Then he got up to make his son pancakes, because the war could wait until Monday. But it was coming. And this time, Ethan wasn't going to be standing in the background when it did. By Monday morning, Ethan Carter had a folder on a flash drive that could burn Meridian Systems to the ground, and he had no idea who in the building he could trust to hand it to. That was the problem that had kept him up all weekend, sitting at his kitchen table after Noah went to bed, staring at the numbers until they blurred. He'd found it. He was sure of it now. The Halverson contract, the $300 million deal. The whole company had celebrated the night Claire threw the glass. Had a second set of invoices running underneath it, routed through a vendor called Ashford Integrated that Ethan had never heard of in 11 years. The money went out to Ashford for services that, as far as Ethan could tell, had never been performed. And Ashford Integrated had been incorporated 14 months ago in Delaware by a holding company whose only listed officer was a name Ethan recognized instantly because he'd seen it on a business card sitting on his own desk 3 days earlier. Raymond Sloan. Gerald Voss's man. They weren't just trying to push Claire out over a fake scandal. They were skimming millions off the biggest contract in the company's history, and they needed her gone before the next audit, so that when the missing money surfaced, it would surface on her watch with her signature on the approvals, and she'd take the fall for a theft she didn't even know was happening. The affair story wasn't the weapon. The affair story was the smoke, and Ethan was holding the fire. He got to the office at 7:40 before almost anyone, and he sat at his desk and he tried to think like Claire thought 4 moves ahead because he was way out of his depth and he knew it. If he took this to HR reported up through a chain that led eventually to a VP named Marcus Reed, whose name was also on 2 of the Ashford invoices. If he took it to the general counsel, The general counsel answered to the board, and the board was where Voss lived. If he took it to Claire directly, the one person he trusted completely, he'd be handing her a document that proved fraud she'd unknowingly signed off on, which meant the second she acted on it, Voss would say she'd fabricated the whole thing to save herself, and it would be her word, the compromised CEO, against a 19-year board member with clean hands. He needed the evidence to come from somewhere Voss couldn't touch. He needed it to be undeniable, and he had no idea how to make that happen because he was an operations manager, not a lawyer, not an investigator, just a man who was good with systems and had noticed that some numbers didn't match. At 8:15, Kevin, the young analyst, dropped into the chair beside his desk with a coffee and a nervous look. "You didn't answer my text this weekend." "I was busy." "Ethan." Kevin lowered his voice. "Sloan's been in the building since 7. He's up on the executive floor. And there's a board meeting on the calendar for Thursday that wasn't there Friday. Emergency session. Whole board's flying in." He swallowed. "People are saying it's about Whitmore. People are saying it's already decided. Whatever's happening, it's happening this week, man." Thursday. 3 days. Ethan felt the floor tilt. He'd assumed he had weeks. He had 3 days to figure out how to detonate a fraud investigation without getting Claire blamed for the fraud, and he had no allies, no lawyer, and a board meeting already stacked against her. "Kevin," he said slowly, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to think hard before you answer because it might cost you your job. Maybe worse." Kevin's face went pale, but he didn't get up. "Okay. How much do you actually know about the vendor payment system, the reconciliation side? The part nobody looks at." That's literally my whole job." "Why?" Ethan looked at the kid he'd mentored for 2 years, 26 years old. No wife, no kids, nothing to lose but everything ahead of him, and he hated himself a little for what he was about to do. But he was out of options and out of time. "Because I found something," Ethan said, "and I need someone who can prove I didn't make it up." He told him. In a conference room on the 4th floor with the blinds down at 8:40 on a Monday morning, Ethan laid the whole thing out, and he watched Kevin's face go from disbelief to horror to a kind of sick, wide-eyed comprehension. And when he finished, Kevin sat there for a long moment, and then he said the thing Ethan had been afraid he'd say. "Ethan, if you're wrong about even one piece of this, they will destroy both of us. They'll say we're the ones who did it." 2 ops guys with access to the payment system trying to frame the board to cover our own theft. That's a cleaner story than the truth. You get that right. The truth is complicated. The lie is simple. They'll pick the lie. "I know. So why are you doing this? She's the CEO. She's got money, lawyers, whatever. Why is it your job to fall on the grenade for Claire Whitmore?" And Ethan almost gave him the easy answer, the noble answer. And then he decided the kid deserved the real one. "Because 4 years ago I was carrying a box down a hallway," Ethan said, "and I was 34 years old, and my wife was dead, and I was working 60 hours a week at a job where nobody knew my name, and I was 1 bad week away from just quitting and giving up on all of it. And a woman I'd never spoken to stopped me and told me my work was the only competent thing she'd seen all week." He looked at Kevin. "You don't understand what that does to a person who's drowning. She had no idea she did it. She probably forgot it by lunch. But I've thought about that one sentence 1,000 times. It's part of why I'm still here. Part of why I didn't fall apart." He shook his head. "She spent 4 years being right about everything and everyone in this building except herself. Everybody took from her. Nobody ever stood next to her. And now she's about to lose everything over a lie, and I'm the only one who knows it's a lie, and I have the evidence sitting in my pocket." He held Kevin's eyes. "So no, it's not my job. But if I know the truth and I stay quiet to protect myself, then I'm exactly the kind of man who watched her fall at that party and did nothing. And I'd rather lose everything than be that man in front of my son." The conference room was very quiet. "Okay," Kevin said. His voice shook a little, but he said it. "Okay, I'm in. God help me. What do you need?" What Ethan needed, it turned out, was 3 days of the most careful, terrifying work of his life. He needed Kevin to independently pull the reconciliation records so the chain of evidence didn't run only through Ethan's hands. He needed both of them to document everything in a way that time-stamped it and made it impossible to claim they'd fabricated it after the fact. And he needed one more thing. The thing that scared him most, because it meant breaking the promise he'd made to Claire on a rainy curb 2 weeks ago. He needed to talk to her. Because she was the only one who could authorize an outside forensic audit, and an outside audit was the only weapon Voss couldn't corrupt. He called her that night at 9:15. She didn't pick up. He called again. Nothing. He understood she'd told him no more calls, and she was keeping her own rule, even though it was killing her, because that was who she was. So at 9:40 he sent a single text, and he chose the words like a man defusing a bomb. Not about us. About the company. About Halverson. You need to hear this before Thursday. It's not what you think it is. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Then his phone rang. "You're not supposed to be contacting me," Claire said, and her voice was exhausted and hard. "I know. Claire, listen to me. I know why the board meeting is Thursday. I know what Voss is really doing, and it isn't about you and me. The affair thing is cover. He's stealing from the Halverson contract millions of dollars through a shell vendor, and he needs you gone before the audit, so it lands on your signature. I have the invoices. I have the incorporation records. Sloane's name is on the shell company." He heard her go completely silent. "Claire, are you there? Say that again," she said quietly. "Slowly." He said it again. Slowly. And when he finished, there was a silence on the line, so total he could hear his own pulse. "Ashford Integrated," Claire finally said, and there was something new in her voice now, something he recognized, the sound of the smartest person in every room she'd ever been in putting a puzzle together in real time. "I approved a vendor onboarding for Ashford in the spring. It came through with full documentation. Reed brought it to me himself, said it was a specialist integration firm for the Halverson build, said we needed them to hit the timeline. I signed it in about 90 seconds because I trusted." She stopped. "Because I trusted Marcus Reed. Because he's been here 12 years, and I never had a reason not to." Her breath was unsteady now. "Ethan, if this is real, if you're right, then I didn't just get set up. I helped them. My signature is the thing that makes it work. Which means, when the audit hits, I'm not just the CEO who got distracted by an affair. I'm the CEO whose signature authorized the fraud. That's not a scandal anymore. That's a criminal referral. That's why I had to tell you before Thursday. Who else knows? One person. Kevin Ortiz, ops analyst. He pulled the records independently, so it's not just my word. He's terrified, but he's solid. You told an analyst before you told me. You told me not to call you Claire," Ethan said, and there was an edge in it he didn't fully intend. "You cut me off. Effective immediately, you said. Don't look at me in the hallway, you said. So I did what you asked, and I built the case anyway because I wasn't going to let you walk into that boardroom on Thursday and get destroyed for something you didn't do just because you were too proud to let me help." He heard how it sounded, and he didn't take it back. "I kept my promise. I stayed away. And I saved your company anyway. You're welcome." There was a long pause. "That was unkind," Claire said softly. "Yeah, it was. I'm tired, Claire. I've been up for 3 days. I've got a kid asking me why I look sad, and I found out the company I've given 11 years to is being robbed by the same people who are about to ruin the one person here who was ever decent to me. So I'm a little short on grace tonight." He rubbed his eyes. "I'm sorry. That wasn't fair." "No," she said. "It was fair. It was completely fair." And then quieter. "Nobody's ever done anything like this for me. Do you understand that? In my whole life. Nobody has ever put themselves at risk to protect me. Everyone in my life has always assumed I could protect myself because I made sure they thought that. And now, you, a man I met 3 weeks ago, you're spending your child's security to save mine, and I don't even know how to hold that. I don't have anywhere to put it." Ethan closed his eyes. "You don't have to put it anywhere. You just have to authorize an outside forensic audit before Thursday so that the evidence comes from somebody Voss can't touch. That's the only move. If it comes from me and Kevin, they'll say we faked it. If it comes from an independent forensic firm you brought in, it's undeniable. If I authorize an audit now, Voss will know I'm onto him. He'll accelerate. He'll move the board meeting up, or he'll leak the affair story tonight to get ahead of it." "Then we don't authorize it through the normal channel," Ethan said. "Do you know anyone? Anyone at all outside the company? A forensic accountant. A lawyer. Somebody with no connection to Meridian. Somebody who owes you a favor and can move fast and quiet." And Claire was silent for a moment, and then she let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "I do actually," she said. "There's a woman named Diane Keller. She ran forensic accounting for the Bureau for 20 years before she went private. She's the best there is, and she's completely independent, and she doesn't scare." A pause. "And 4 years ago, when I was cleaning up the mess this company was in, she found a $2 million embezzlement my predecessor buried, and I made sure she got paid and got credit when a lot of people wanted to bury her along with it." Ethan could hear something firming up in her voice, the CEO coming back online, the Iron Queen picking up her weapons. "Diane Keller owes me. And more than that, Diane Keller would walk over broken glass to take down men like Gerald Voss. It's kind of her whole thing. Then call her tonight. I'm calling her the second we hang up." She paused. "Ethan?" "Yeah. Get some sleep, please. Not for me, for Noah. He needs his father sharp, not falling apart. Whatever happens Thursday, that little boy needs you standing up straight." Her voice caught just slightly. "You've spent 3 days protecting me. Let me protect one thing for you. Go to bed." He almost cried right there on his couch from pure exhaustion and something else he wasn't ready to name. "Okay," he said. "Okay. Good night, Claire." "Good night, Ethan. And thank you. I know I keep saying it. I don't have a better word yet." She hung up and she called Diane Keller, and by Tuesday morning, a forensic accountant with 20 years at the Bureau and a personal grudge against corporate predators had a copy of everything Ethan and Kevin had assembled, and she was tearing into the Ashford records with the focused fury of a woman who had been waiting her whole career for exactly this kind of fight. And that should have been the moment it started to turn. That should have been the moment the good guys got ahead. Except Gerald Voss didn't get to be Gerald Voss by being slow. On Tuesday afternoon at 2:20, Raymond Sloan appeared at Ethan's desk again. No smile this time. Just a manila envelope which he set down without a word, and a look that Ethan would remember for a long time, the flat, patient look of a man who has already decided how something ends. "Mr. Voss wanted you to have this before you did anything you couldn't take back," Sloan said. "Open it tonight, alone, not at your desk." And he walked away. Ethan didn't open it at his desk. He waited. He got through the afternoon with his heart pounding. He picked up Noah. He made dinner. He helped with homework. He read the bedtime story twice because Noah asked, and it wasn't until 9:30, when the apartment was quiet, that he sat down at the kitchen table and opened the envelope. Inside were photographs. Photographs of him and Claire. The night of the party, his car pulling into the parking garage of his own building at 11:40 p.m. Claire in the passenger seat. The two of them walking in together, her in the party dress. A shot through his own front window, blurred but unmistakable, of Claire sitting at his kitchen table the next morning in his t-shirt. A shot of Noah standing in the doorway. They'd been watching the apartment. That night. They'd had someone outside his home photographing his 8-year-old son through the window, and they'd been sitting on these pictures for 3 weeks, waiting for the exact moment they'd hurt the most. And there was a note, typed, unsigned. "Mr. Carter, a man in your position has one asset in this world, and it is not his job. It is his reputation as a father." These photographs, provided to the appropriate parties, tell a story about a man who brought his female employer home and had his young son present. That story does not end with you losing your job. It ends with people asking questions about your judgment as a parent. We would hate for anyone to start asking those questions. Deliver a signed statement to Mr. Sloan by Wednesday at noon, confirming an improper relationship with Ms. Whitmore, and these photographs disappear, and you keep your position, your reputation, and your son. Continue on your current course, and we cannot promise any of those things remain intact. The choice, as always, is yours. Ethan sat at his kitchen table and read the note 4 times, and his hands did not shake, and that scared him more than anything, because the not shaking meant he'd gone somewhere very cold and very still. Somewhere he hadn't been since the night the doctors told him Sarah wasn't going to make it. They were threatening Noah. Not his job, not his career, his son. They were telling him that if he didn't lie about Claire, if he didn't sign a statement that would hand Voss the exact weapon he needed, they'd insinuate to child services, to the school, to anyone who'd listen, that Ethan Carter was an unfit father, and they'd use a photograph of his own little boy standing in a doorway to do it. He got up. He walked down the hall. He stood in the doorway of Noah's room, and he watched his son sleep, one arm flung over the edge of the bed. The framed photo of a mother he didn't remember sitting on the nightstand. And Ethan felt something happen inside his chest that was not fear and was not grief. It was older than both of those. It was the thing that comes up out of the ground in a man when someone threatens his child and it does not negotiate. I went back to the kitchen. He picked up his phone, and for a long moment he stood there with his thumb over Claire's name, because the smart move, the safe move, the move that protected Noah was to sign the statement. Lie about Claire. Give Voss what he wanted. Keep his son safe. Claire had money and lawyers and a woman named Diane Keller. Claire could survive losing the company. Noah had exactly one parent in the entire world, and that parent was standing in a kitchen at 9:45 at night, holding photographs of him taken through a window by a stranger. Any reasonable man would sign. Ethan set the phone down without calling. He picked it back up. He set it down again. And then he did the only thing he could think of that let him look at himself in the mirror and still be the father his son thought he was. He called Claire, and when she answered, he didn't tell her about the photographs. Not yet. He needed to know one thing first. Claire, Diane Keller. How long until she has enough to take to the board? Not everything. Just enough. Undeniable. She thinks Thursday morning. Why, Ethan? What's wrong, your voice? Thursday morning is too late, Ethan said quietly. I need it by Wednesday noon. Can she get you something undeniable by Wednesday noon? Ethan, what happened? Tell me what happened right now. And Ethan looked at the photographs spread across his kitchen table, at the blurred shot of his sleeping wife's face in a frame, at his son, standing in a doorway, with his hair sticking up. And he understood that the war he'd chosen to walk into had just walked into his home instead. And that whatever happened in the next 36 hours, there was no version of it where he came out the same man who'd carried a box down a hallway 4 years ago. They took pictures of Noah, he said. His voice broke on his son's name. Claire. They took pictures of my boy. And on the other end of the line, 3 weeks after she'd thrown a glass against a wall in front of 300 people. Claire Whitmore made a sound he'd never heard from her before, low and furious and absolutely without fear. And she said 7 words that told Ethan the Iron Queen was done running. Give me the address. I'm coming over. Claire Whitmore knocked on Ethan Carter's door at 10:20 that night, and when he opened it, she wasn't the woman he'd walked out of the party. She wasn't even the woman who'd cried in his passenger seat. She was something else entirely, coat still on, hair pulled back, a leather folder clutched against her chest, and a look in her eyes he'd only ever seen on people who had stopped being afraid, because they'd finally found something worth more than their fear. Where are they? She said. Not a question. The photographs. Show me. He stepped aside and let her in. She was already pulling off her coat, already scanning the apartment with those quick, absorbing eyes. And when she reached the kitchen table and saw them laid out, her in his t-shirt, his car in the garage, Noah in the doorway with his hair sticking up, she went very still, and Ethan watched her jaw tighten and her knuckles go white around the edge of the table. That's his bedroom window, she said quietly. They photographed a sleeping child through a window. Yeah. To make you lie about me. Yeah. Claire straightened up, and when she turned to face him, there were no tears, and there was no mask either. There was just a cold, clean fury that Ethan realized was the most honest thing he'd ever seen from her. For 4 years, I have let men like Gerald Voss believe I would eventually break, she said. I let them think it because it was useful, because a woman they underestimate is a woman they don't watch closely enough. And every time one of them pushed, I bent and I smiled and I waited because I told myself the company was worth it. The company was always worth it. Her voice dropped. And then they put a camera outside your son's window. And I want you to understand something, Ethan. They didn't just make an enemy tonight. They made the last mistake they're ever going to make at my company. Claire, no, listen to me. She set the leather folder on the table right on top of the photographs covering them. You've been carrying this alone for 3 days because you thought that's what protecting people looks like. I've been carrying everything alone for 35 years for the same reason. And look where it got both of us. You've got a threat against your child on your kitchen table, and I've got a boardroom full of men who think I'm finished. She opened the folder. So we're done carrying things alone. Starting right now, sit down, because Diane Keller called me 20 minutes ago on my way here, and you need to hear what she found. They sat. It was 10:35. Down the hall, Noah slept through all of it, and neither of them spoke above a low, urgent murmur. 2 people bent over a kitchen table conspiring in the dark to save each other. Ashford Integrated isn't the only shell, Claire said, spreading out the pages Diane had sent her. It's the sloppiest one, the one you found, but Diane pulled the thread and it goes deeper. There are 3 shells. Ashford Bellwether Consulting and a thing called Corvid Holdings. Together they've moved just under $9 million out of the Halverson contract over 14 months. And here's the part that changes everything. She looked up at him. It's not just Voss and Sloan. Diane traced the beneficial ownership. Marcus Reed is on Bellwether. And Corvid, the biggest one, $5 million by itself. Corvid's officer of record is a woman named Patricia Lorne. Ethan frowned. I don't know that name. Neither did I at first. Patricia Lorne is Gerald Voss's sister-in-law. Claire's voice was flat and precise. Which means Voss didn't just organize the theft. He personally profited from it through his own family, and he left a paper trail doing it because he never once believed anyone would look. Why would they? He controls the board. He controls the audit committee. The only person with the authority to bring in an outside forensic accountant was me, and he had a plan to remove me before I'd ever have a reason to. She almost smiled. He built the perfect crime, and it had exactly one flaw. What flaw? You. She said it simply. He accounted for every executive, every board member, every auditor, every lawyer. He did not account for an operations manager who reads everything and notices when numbers don't match. He looked right at you and saw furniture. And that's going to cost him $9 million and 19 years of his life. Ethan sat back. The scale of it was starting to land on him. Claire, this isn't a scandal anymore. This is federal. Yes, you could go to prison for the approvals you signed. I could. She didn't flinch. Which is why the timing matters more than anything. If I move first, if I bring this to the full board with Diane's independent findings before Voss makes his play, then I'm the CEO who caught the fraud. If Voss moves first, if he ousts me Thursday and the theft surfaces later, then I'm the CEO who committed it. Same facts, same signature. The only variable is who tells the story first. She met his eyes. It's exactly what I told you 3 weeks ago. It doesn't matter what happened. It only matters what it looks like. Well, I'm done letting other people decide what my life looks like. So what do we do? Claire was quiet for a moment, and then she said the thing that told Ethan she'd already thought it all the way through 4 moves ahead, the way she thought about everything. There's a problem, she said. Diane's findings are strong, but they're not finished. She needs until Thursday morning to have the beneficial ownership documented in a way that's court-proof. Until then, it's compelling, but a good lawyer could still muddy it. And Voss gave you until Wednesday noon to sign the statement, or he releases the photographs. So, she folded her hands. Between Wednesday noon and Thursday morning, there's a gap. A window where he'll expect me to be reeling from a scandal about you, and where he doesn't yet know I have Diane, and where his own evidence isn't public, but neither is mine. Her eyes sharpened. That gap is where we win, but only if we use it exactly right. And it's going to require you to do something that goes against every instinct you have. What? I need you to sign the statement. Ethan stared at her. What? Not the real one, not a confession. She leaned forward. I need you to go to Sloan on Wednesday morning and tell him you'll sign. Tell him you've thought about it. You have a child. You can't take the risk. You'll give them what they want. By the meeting. Get Voss in a room thinking he's won, thinking you've folded, thinking the photographs worked. Because a man who thinks he's already won stops watching his back. She held his gaze. And while he's celebrating, Diane finishes her work, and I call an emergency board session of my own for Thursday, and Voss walks into that room expecting to bury me with your statement. And instead, he walks into a forensic fraud presentation with his own sister-in-law's name on it. Ethan finished slowly. Instead, Claire said, he walks into the end of his life. For a moment, neither of them said anything. It was 11:05. The refrigerator hummed. And Ethan sat there weighing it because it was brilliant. It was exactly the kind of thing Claire did better than anyone alive. And it also required him to walk into a room with the men who'd photographed his son and pretend to be beaten. There's a risk, he said finally. If I tell Sloan I'll sign, and then Diane's not ready Thursday, and the board session gets delayed, then I've signed nothing. I've bought us a day, and Voss releases the photographs anyway out of spite. And now there's a paper trail of me agreeing to lie. It could look like I really did have something to hide. Yes. You're asking me to bet my son's reputation on your timing. I'm asking you to trust me, Claire said quietly. The way you asked me to trust you 3 weeks ago on a rainy curb when you told me to get in a car with a man I barely knew. I got in the car, Ethan. I trusted you with the worst night of my life, and you didn't let me fall. She reached across the table, and for the first time she put her hand over his, and she didn't pretend it hadn't happened. Now I'm asking you to get in the car with me. One time. And I swear to you, I swear on everything, I will not let anything happen to that little boy. Not his reputation. Not his safety. Nothing. I would burn the entire company to the ground before I let Gerald Voss touch a hair on Noah's head. Do you believe me? Ethan looked at her hand on his. He looked at the woman who 3 weeks ago couldn't say his first name, and who was now sitting in his kitchen at 11 at night, having driven across the city the instant she learned his child was in danger, offering to torch everything she'd spent 4 years building, rather than let a threat against his son go unanswered. I believe you, he said, and that was the moment. Not the party, not the drive home, not any of it. That was the moment. Ethan Carter stopped thinking of Claire Whitmore as his boss. They worked until 1 in the morning. They built the whole thing step by step, hour by hour, every contingency, every fallback. And when Claire finally stood to leave, she paused at the door, and she looked back at the apartment one more time. The crayon drawings, the finished worksheet, the small sneakers, the photo of Sarah on the side table, and something moved across her face that had nothing to do with fraud or boardrooms. You know what I keep thinking about, she said. When I was standing in that garage the night of the party, and everything was falling apart, and I couldn't think of a single person in the entire world to call. I run a company with 3,000 employees, and I couldn't think of one person who would come. She looked at him. And then a man I'd barely spoken to in 4 years drove me home and gave me his kid's playroom to sleep in, and never asked for anything. Her voice thickened. I've spent my whole life being told I could have anything I wanted if I was just strong enough, ruthless enough, right enough. And it turns out the only thing I ever actually wanted was for somebody to come when I fell. She swallowed. You came, Ethan. Nobody else came. Just you. Claire. Good night, she said quickly, before either of them could turn it into the thing it was becoming. Sleep. Big day tomorrow. Sign nothing that isn't the fake. And she was gone into the night, and Ethan stood in his open doorway for a long time after her taillights disappeared. And he understood that whatever happened Thursday, he had already lost the ability to go back to being the man he was 3 weeks ago. Wednesday came fast and mean. At 9:30 a.m. Ethan found Raymond Sloan on the executive floor, and he did the hardest piece of acting he'd ever done in his life. He made his voice small. He made his shoulders drop. He looked at the floor. I've thought about it, he said. You're right. I've got a kid. I can't risk what you're talking about. Whatever you need me to sign, I'll sign it. But I want to hear it from Voss. I want him to look me in the eye and tell me the photographs go away. All of them. And I want it tomorrow morning before the board meeting so I know it's done. Sloan studied him with those flat eyes. For one terrible second, Ethan was sure he'd overplayed it, that Sloan could see straight through him, that the whole thing was about to collapse. "Tomorrow morning," Sloan said finally. 8 a.m. Mr. Voss's office, before the board convenes. You sign, he confirms the photographs are destroyed, and this ends clean. He almost smiled. "You're a smart man, Mr. Carter. A father knows when to fold." "Yeah," Ethan said, and he let his voice crack because it wasn't entirely acting. "A father knows when to fold." He walked away, and he made it to the stairwell, and he stood there with his back against the cold concrete wall and his heart hammering, and he texted Claire 2 words. He bit. Her reply came back in 4 seconds. "Then it's done. Diane finishes tonight. Board session, 9 tomorrow. I'm calling it myself in 1 hour, emergency governance review, all members required. Voss thinks he's meeting you at 8. He'll walk out of your fake surrender and straight into a room where I'm waiting. Hold the line, Ethan. 1 more day." But Gerald Voss had not survived 19 years in that boardroom by trusting easy victories. At 4:00 that afternoon. Everything Claire had planned nearly came apart because Voss did the one thing they hadn't accounted for. He didn't wait for Ethan's statement. He didn't wait for anything. He made a preemptive move so cold and so smart that when Kevin came sprinting into the operations bay at 4:05, white as a sheet, Ethan knew before the kid opened his mouth that they were in trouble. "He's going to HR," Kevin gasped. "Voss, right now. He's filing a formal complaint against Whitmore. Says an employee, he means you, Ethan. He means you came to him privately and reported an inappropriate relationship with the CEO involving misuse of company resources. He's getting ahead of the whole thing. He's making himself the guy who reported the scandal. If he files first, then tomorrow, when Claire tries to present the fraud, it looks like retaliation. It looks like she's attacking the man who blew the whistle on her affair." Ethan's blood went cold. It was exactly the same move Claire had planned in Mirror Image. Get your story on the record first, so the other side's truth looks like a desperate counterattack. Voss had done it back to them. And if his complaint hit HR before Diane's findings were ready, then Claire's emergency board session tomorrow wouldn't look like justice. It would look like a cornered CEO smearing an innocent board member to save her own skin. Ethan was already moving. When is he filing? 5 o'clock. HR closes at 5. He's timing it so it's on the record end of business today, but nobody can respond until tomorrow morning. Ethan looked at the clock. 4:08. He had 52 minutes. He called Claire. She didn't pick up. She was in the emergency session prep, phone off. He called again. Nothing. He texted, "Voss filing HR complaint against you at 5. Getting ahead of us. Call me now." And then he stood there in the operations bay with 50 minutes on the clock and no way to reach the one person who could stop it. And he understood that if Voss's complaint went in first, everything they'd built the night before turned to ash. There was only one thing to do, and it was insane. And it was the kind of thing that got a mid-level employee fired on the spot. But Ethan Carter had stopped 3 weeks ago being the kind of man who stayed in the background. So he took the stairs 2 at a time up to the executive floor, and he walked into the HR department at 4:19, and he asked to see the head of HR, a woman named Barbara Pennington, immediately on a matter of company financial integrity. "Mr. Carter, we're closing in." "Barbara." He set Kevin's flash drive on her desk. "In about 40 minutes, Gerald Voss is going to walk in here and file a complaint against Claire Whitmore. He's going to tell you an employee reported an inappropriate relationship. I'm that employee. I'm the one he's going to name." He watched her face change. "And I'm here to tell you, before he does, that it's a lie, and that I have proof it's a lie, and that the real story is $9 million in fraud that Gerald Voss committed through 3 shell companies, one of them owned by his own sister-in-law. It's all on that drive. An independent forensic accountant named Diane Keller has been verifying it for 2 days." He kept his voice level. "I know how this looks. I know I'm an operations manager and he's a board member. But you're the head of HR and your job is the integrity of this company. And I am handing you the truth 40 minutes before a very powerful man walks in here to hand you a lie. What you do with it is up to you. But you can't say nobody told you." Barbara Pennington looked at the flash drive. She looked at Ethan. She'd been at Meridian for 22 years, and she had watched a lot of powerful men do a lot of ugly things, and something in her face told Ethan she'd been waiting a long time for someone to hand her a reason. "Sit down, Mr. Carter," she said quietly, and she picked up the flash drive. "Tell me everything. And talk fast, because we've got about 35 minutes before this gets very complicated." At 4:52, Gerald Voss walked into the HR department with Raymond Sloan at his side and a printed complaint in his hand, silver-haired and smiling, a man arriving to collect a victory 19 years in the making. And Barbara Pennington looked up from her desk where Ethan Carter was still sitting, and where a forensic summary of $9 million in fraud was open on her monitor, and Gerald Voss's smile died on his face one muscle at a time. "Gerald," Barbara said pleasantly, "you're just in time. Mr. Carter and I were discussing Corvid Holdings, and Patricia Lorne. I understand she's family." The silence in that office was the loudest thing Ethan had ever heard. Voss recovered fast. He was good. Ethan had to give him that. "Barbara, I don't know what this man has told you, but he's a disgruntled employee, having an affair with the CEO, and I'm here to file a formal—" "You can file whatever you like," Barbara said. "I'll note the timestamp. It'll go right in the record next to the forensic findings Mr. Carter brought me at 4:19. Everything's dated, Gerald. Everything's on the record now." She folded her hands. "So, would you still like to file your complaint, knowing it'll sit in the same file as the documentation of the fraud? Or would you like to take a moment?" Ethan watched a 19-year board member realize in real time that the operations manager he'd dismissed as furniture had just gotten to HR 40 minutes ahead of him and flipped the whole board. Voss turned his eyes on Ethan, and for the first time there was no smile at all. Just a look of pure distilled hatred, the look of a predator who's just discovered the thing he was hunting has teeth. "You have no idea what you've done," Voss said softly. "I know exactly what I've done," Ethan said, and he stood up, and he was surprised to find his voice didn't shake at all. "You put a camera outside my son's bedroom window. You took pictures of a sleeping 8-year-old to blackmail me into lying about a good woman so you could steal $9 million and blame her for it." He stepped closer. "So no, Mr. Voss, I know exactly what I've done. I stopped being furniture. And tomorrow morning when the board convenes, you're going to find out what that costs you." Voss stared at him for a long, cold moment. Then he turned and walked out, Sloan trailing behind him, and the second. The door closed. Barbara Pennington let out a breath she'd apparently been holding for the entire conversation. "Mr. Carter," she said, "I have been at this company for 22 years. I have never seen anybody do what you just did." She shook her head slowly. "That man is going to spend every ounce of power he has left trying to destroy you tonight. You know that, right?" "I know." "Then you'd better make sure your CEO is ready for tomorrow, because Gerald Voss is not going to walk into that boardroom and go quietly. Cornered men don't." She looked at him. "He's going to have one last card. Men like him always do, and I'd bet my pension he's about to go play it." Ethan finally reached Claire at 6:40 that evening, and when he told her what had happened, Voss's preemptive complaint, the sprint to HR, Barbara Pennington, the flash drive, the confrontation, there was a long silence on the line. "You went to HR," Claire said slowly. "Alone, against a board member, and you flipped the head of HR to our side in 30 minutes. I ran out of time to do it the clever way." "Ethan." Her voice was strange. "Do you understand that you just did in 40 minutes what I've been trying to figure out how to do for 3 weeks? You didn't wait for permission. You didn't wait for the plan. You saw the danger, and you moved." A pause. "That's exactly what I do. That's the thing everyone's afraid of in me. And you just did it to save me." She let out a breath. "Barbara's right, though. Voss has one card left. And I think I know what it is." "What?" "He can't stop the fraud findings anymore. They're on the record. HR has them. Diane's finishing tonight. But he can still poison me personally. Tomorrow in front of the board when he's cornered, he's going to do the only thing he has left. He's going to release the photographs anyway. Not to blackmail you, that ship's sailed. Out of pure spite to make sure that even if he goes down, he takes both of us with him. He'll put those pictures in front of the entire board and say, 'Fine, arrest me, but this woman was sleeping with a subordinate and using company funds to reward him, and you're going to keep her as CEO. Her voice was steady, but Ethan could hear what it cost her. Even in defeat, he can make it so I win the company and lose my name. And he can make it so a photograph of your son becomes the thing that ends both our reputations. That's his last card. And I don't have a way to stop him from playing it. Ethan was quiet for the moment. And then slowly, an idea began to form, a terrible, simple, honest idea. The kind that only occurs to a man who has run completely out of clever moves and has nothing left but the truth. Then we don't stop him from playing it, Ethan said. What? We play it first. Ethan, what are you? Claire, listen to me. He was pacing now, the whole thing assembling in his head. His entire weapon is that the photographs are a secret. A shameful secret that we've been hiding that he can expose. The only power those pictures have is that we're afraid of them. So we take the fear away. Tomorrow, before he can say a word, you tell the board yourself. Everything. The fire the night I drove you home, the playroom, all of it. Exactly as it happened. Nothing to be ashamed of, because nothing shameful happened. You stand up in front of that board, and you say, 3 weeks ago, my apartment burned down on the worst night of my life, and an employee of this company showed me basic human decency and gave me a safe place to sleep, and Gerald Voss photographed his child through a window to try to turn kindness into a scandal so he could steal from you. He stopped pacing. You don't hide the truth, Claire. You make Voss's weapon useless by holding it up in the light yourself, because a secret is only a weapon in the dark. In the daylight, it's just the truth. And the truth is that you did nothing wrong, and I did nothing wrong, and the only person in this whole story who should be ashamed is the man who put a camera outside a little boy's window. The line was silent for a long, long moment. And then Claire Whitmore, the Iron Queen of Seattle, the woman who'd built her entire life on never letting anyone see behind the mask, said something Ethan never expected to hear. I've spent 35 years making sure nobody ever saw the real thing, she said, and her voice was breaking, but it was breaking in a way that sounded almost like relief. And you're telling me the way to win is to just let them see it. To stand up in front of the most powerful people I know and just tell the truth about the worst night of my life. A shaky breath. That's the most terrifying thing anyone has ever asked me to do. I know. It might not work. They might look at me and see weakness. They might decide a CEO who fell apart at a party and slept at an employee's apartment isn't fit to run a company, fraud or no fraud. They might, Ethan admitted. But Claire, you've spent 4 years trying to win them over by being perfect, and it got you a board full of men waiting for you to crack. Maybe perfect was never going to work. Maybe the only thing that was ever going to work was true. He paused. You told me once not to let anyone talk me out of doing it my way. So I'm telling you the same thing back. Walk into that room tomorrow and do it your way. The real way. The whole truth out loud in the daylight and let them decide. And whatever they decide, Noah and I will be exactly the same people we are tonight. You will not lose us tomorrow no matter what that board says. I need you to know that going in. There was a sound on the line that might have been a sob and might have been a laugh. Okay, Claire whispered. Okay, the truth, in the daylight. A breath. God help me. 9 a.m. tomorrow. I'll tell them everything. A pause. Ethan, will you be there in the building? I don't need you in the room. I need to know you're in the building. I'll be there at 8, Ethan said. I've got a fake surrender to walk into first, remember, and then I'll be right outside that boardroom the whole time. If you need me, I'm 10 feet away. 10 feet away, Claire repeated softly. You know, 3 weeks ago, the whole world was 10 feet away, and might as well have been on the moon. And now the only thing that makes me think I can survive tomorrow is knowing one specific person is going to be standing 10 feet outside a door. She let out a breath. What did you do to me, Ethan Carter? Same thing you did to me 4 years ago in a hallway, he said. Reminded you that you're not furniture. She laughed, a real one, wet and broken and true. And then she said, Good night. Kiss Noah for me. Tell him 7 times 8 is 56, and I said he's the smartest kid in Seattle. I'll tell him. 10 feet away, Ethan. 10 feet away, Claire, I promise. And they hung up, and the two of them sat alone in their separate homes on opposite ends of the city on the night before everything, each one holding the strange and terrifying new fact that after a lifetime of standing alone, there was finally one other person in the world they didn't have to face the morning without. At 8:00 the next morning, Ethan Carter walked into Gerald Voss's office to surrender, and he was carrying nothing but a pen and the hardest performance of his life. Voss was behind his desk, and Sloan stood by the window, and there was a single sheet of paper waiting on the polished surface. The statement typed and ready. A confession that Ethan Carter had engaged in an improper relationship with Claire Whitmore and received company resources as a result. Voss slid it across the desk with one finger, and he was smiling again, the old smile back in place, because Voss believed he'd won. He believed the operations manager had folded the way fathers fold, and that in 15 minutes he'd have Ethan's signature and a weapon that would turn Claire's fraud presentation into a desperate act of revenge. Sit, Voss said. Read it, sign it, and your son's photographs go into a shredder while you watch. Everyone walks away. It's a good deal, Mr. Carter. It's a mercy honestly given the alternative. Ethan sat. He picked up the paper. He read it slowly, letting Voss watch him read it, letting the older man savor the moment. And then he set it down. Can I ask you something first? Ethan said. Man to man, before I sign. Voss spread his hands magnanimous in victory. Of course. The pictures of my son, through the window. Ethan kept his voice quiet. Do you have kids, Mr. Voss? Something flickered across Voss's face. I have 2 daughters. Then you know, Ethan said. You know what it does to a father to see a stranger's photograph of his sleeping child. You have daughters, and you did that anyway to a man who never did a thing to you so you could steal money you don't even need. He shook his head slowly. I just wanted to understand what kind of man I was signing this for. Now I understand. And then Ethan looked at the clock on Voss's wall. It was 8:14. You know what the funny thing is, Ethan said, and now something changed in his voice, and Voss's smile began very slightly to falter. You gave me until Wednesday noon to decide, and I spent that whole time thinking you'd outplanned me. 19 years on the board, 3 shell companies, a camera outside my kid's window. I figured a man like you thinks of everything. He set the pen down on the desk unused. But you made one mistake, Mr. Voss. You scheduled this meeting for 8 o'clock, before the board convenes at 9, because you wanted my signature in hand when you walked in there. He met the older man's eyes. Which means for the last 14 minutes you've been sitting in this office with me, and you haven't been in the building, and you have no idea what's been happening downstairs while you waited for me to fold. The color drained out of Gerald Voss's face. What did you do? He said. I didn't do anything, Ethan said, standing up, leaving the unsigned statement on the desk. I just kept you talking. Barbara Pennington from HR has had the forensic file since yesterday afternoon. Diane Keller finished the beneficial ownership documentation at 4 o'clock this morning. Corvid Holdings, Patricia Lorne, all of it court-proof. And right now, while you've been sitting up here waiting for me to sign away my dignity, every single member of the board has been receiving that documentation in a governance packet that Claire Whitmore sent at 7:45 this morning. He walked to the door. You wanted my signature in hand when you walked into that boardroom, Mr. Voss. Well, you're going to walk in with nothing, and they're going to be waiting for you. Voss lunged for his phone, and Sloan was already moving toward the door, and Ethan Carter stepped out into the hallway and let them go, because it didn't matter anymore. It was 8:16. The board convened at 9, and there was nothing on earth Gerald Voss could do in 44 minutes to stop what was already in every board member's inbox. Ethan took the stairs down to the 14th floor to the corridor outside the main boardroom, and he found a chair against the wall 10 feet from the door, exactly where he'd promised he'd be. And at 8:50, the elevator opened, and Claire Whitmore stepped out. She was in a charcoal suit, and her hair was pulled back, and she looked for the first time in the 3 weeks Ethan had known her completely herself. Not the mask, not the Iron Queen. Just Claire, steady, clear-eyed, terrified, and walking toward the hardest room of her life anyway. She stopped when she saw him. You're here, she said. 10 feet away, he said. Told you. She looked at the closed boardroom door, then back at him, and for a second, all the composure wavered. I've run 1,000 board meetings. I've never once been afraid to walk into that room, and right now my hands are shaking. She held one up. It was true. How do I do this, Ethan? How do I stand up in front of the 12 most powerful people I know and tell them the truth about the worst night of my life? You don't do it for them, Ethan said. You do it the same way you've done everything, because it's right and because you're done letting other people write your story. He stood up. You told me 4 years ago not to let anyone talk me out of doing it my way. So I'm telling you one more time. Walk in there and do it your way. The whole truth out loud in the daylight. And when it's over, whatever they decide, I'll still be right here, 10 feet away. Claire looked at him for a long moment. And then she did something that surprised them both. She reached out, and she took his hand, and she held it tightly for exactly 3 seconds in the corridor outside the boardroom where anyone could see. For 4 years, she said quietly. I've walked into that room alone, every single time, and I told myself that's what strength was. She squeezed his hand. It turns out strength is knowing there's one person who'll still be standing outside the door when you come out, no matter what happens on the other side of it. She let go. Thank you for being that person, Ethan. Nobody's ever been that person for me. And then Claire Whitmore turned, and she squared her shoulders, and she walked into the boardroom, and the door closed behind her. Ethan sat back down in his chair, and he waited. He couldn't hear the words. The boardroom was soundproofed, and all he had was the closed door and his own imagination, and 40 minutes that felt like 40 years. He knew the shape of what was happening on the other side because they'd built it together at his kitchen table 2 nights ago. He knew that Claire would open not with the fraud, but with the truth about herself, the fire, the phone call, the night she fell apart, the man who drove her home. He knew she'd lay her own vulnerability on the table first in the daylight, so that when Voss reached for the photographs, there'd be nothing left to expose. He knew she'd take the one weapon the man had left and make it useless by holding it up to the light herself. But knowing the shape of it and living through the 40 minutes were 2 different things. At 9:20, the door opened and Ethan's heart stopped, but it was just an assistant hurrying out with a flash drive, and the glimpse Ethan caught of the room before the door closed again was of a large screen and Diane Keller standing beside it, and 12 board members leaning forward, and it told him nothing about whether they were winning or losing. At 9:35, raised voices. He couldn't make out words, but he could hear the register of them, and one of them was Voss, and Voss sounded like a man who had stopped being calm. At 9:50, silence. At 10:05, the door opened again, and this time it stayed open. The first person out was Gerald Voss, and Ethan knew the instant he saw the man's face exactly how it had gone. Voss came out gray and hollow, 19 years of power drained out of him in a single hour, and behind him came 2 men. Ethan didn't recognize in dark suits, who were very clearly not board members, and Raymond Sloan behind them, with his hands already absurdly half raised. Voss stopped when he saw Ethan sitting there in the corridor. For a moment, the 2 men looked at each other. The board member and the operations manager. The man who'd seen furniture and the furniture that had ended him. You should have signed, Voss said quietly. No, Ethan said. I really shouldn't have. And they took Gerald Voss away, and Ethan Carter watched him go, and he felt none of the triumph he'd expected. He just felt tired, and he felt sad in a strange way for a man with 2 daughters who'd thrown away everything for money he didn't need. And then he stopped thinking about Voss entirely because Claire had come out of the boardroom and she was walking toward him and he couldn't read her face at all. Well, he said, standing. She stopped in front of him. Her eyes were wet. I told them everything, she said. All of it. The fire. The phone call. Napa. The playroom. Every single thing exactly as it happened in front of all 12 of them. Her voice was unsteady. And then Diane presented the fraud. And then Voss tried to play the photographs he actually did at Ethan. He stood up and put them on the screen. Your son through the window, the whole thing, and he said exactly what we thought he'd say. Arrest me if you want, but this woman is unfit, and you all know it. A tear slid down her face. And the room went completely silent. And, and a board member named Eleanor Shaw, 71 years old, been on this board longer than anyone, never says 2 words in a meeting. Eleanor Shaw stood up. Claire's voice broke. And she looked at the photograph of Noah on the screen, and she looked at Gerald Voss and she said, "Gerald, you've just shown us a photograph of a child that you had taken through his bedroom window. You've shown it to us as though it were evidence against her. But the only thing it's evidence of is what kind of man you are." And she turned to the rest of the board and she said, "A woman's building burned down, and an employee gave her a couch, and this man built a surveillance operation around a child to weaponize it. I've heard enough. I move that we remove Gerald Voss from this board immediately and refer this entire matter to federal authorities." Claire wiped her eyes. It was unanimous, Ethan. 12-0. Well, 11-0. Voss didn't get a vote. She let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. The truth, in the daylight, it worked. It actually worked. Ethan sat down hard in the chair because his legs didn't quite work anymore. It's over. It's over. Claire sat down beside him right there in the corridor, the CEO and the operations manager side by side against the wall. Voss and Sloan are being taken into federal custody. Marcus Reed resigned 20 minutes ago and is about to get a very bad phone call. Diane's findings go to the U.S. attorney this afternoon. The company recovers the $9 million. She turned her head to look at him. And your son's photographs are being deleted from every device by court order, and the men who took them are going to prison. Her voice dropped. Noah's safe, Ethan. Whatever else happens, Noah is completely safe. I told you I'd burn the company down before I let them touch him. I didn't even have to. The truth did it for me. Ethan closed his eyes and let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding for a week. And then he felt Claire's hand find his again there in the corridor, and this time she didn't let go after 3 seconds. They sat there for a while not talking, two people at the end of a war, and it should have been the happy ending. And in a lot of ways it was. But there was one more thing Ethan had to do, and it was the thing that surprised Claire more than anything else that had happened all morning. 3 days later, he resigned. He came into her office, her real office, the corner 114 floors up, and he set a single sheet of paper on her desk, and Claire looked at it and looked at him and said, "No." Claire. No, absolutely not. You just saved this company. You saved me, and you want to quit. I have to. He sat down across from her. And you know why. You're the smartest person I've ever met. You already know why, you just don't want to say it. He leaned forward. As long as I work here, as long as I'm your employee, there's going to be a version of Gerald Voss. Maybe not as evil. Maybe just some ambitious VP or some blogger or some board member who wants leverage. And every single time you and I are in the same building, somebody can tell the story Voss tried to tell. The affair. The favoritism. The CEO and her operations manager. He shook his head. We beat Voss because nothing was hiding in the dark. But if I stay, we spend the rest of our lives with something to hide. And I'm done hiding things, Claire. I spent 3 weeks doing it, and it nearly cost me my son. Claire was quiet for a long moment. So you're leaving because of me? I'm leaving, Ethan said carefully, because I don't want there to be a wall between us anymore. And as long as you sign my paychecks, there's always going to be a wall. It's your title and my title, and it doesn't matter what's true, it only matters what it looks like. You taught me that. So I'm removing the thing that makes it look like something it isn't. He held her eyes. I found a job. A smaller company over in Bellevue. Operations director, actually a step up, more money, better hours. I start in 3 weeks. I'll have time to pick Noah up from school. Real time. He almost smiled. For the first time in 6 years, I'll be able to be at every single thing that matters to him. That's not nothing, Claire. That's the whole reason I've been killing myself all these years. To get to a place where I could just be his dad. And Claire Whitmore, who had spent 4 years being right about everything, understood that he was right about this too, and it broke her heart a little, and she signed the paper. Okay, she said quietly. Okay, I understand. She set down the pen. Can I ask you something? Anything. The wall you keep talking about, The one between us. She looked at him steadily. When you're not my employee anymore, is the wall gone? Or is there another one behind it? Ethan looked at her for a long moment. And then he did something he'd wanted to do for longer than he'd let himself admit. He reached across the desk and he took her hand. Not for 3 seconds. Not in a corridor, but slowly, deliberately, in the daylight in her office with the door open. When I'm not your employee anymore, he said, there's no wall at all. Just you and me and a kid who thinks you're the smartest person in Seattle, and a whole lot of things I've been wanting to say and haven't let myself. He squeezed her hand. But not yet. Not while your name's still on my paycheck. We do this right, Claire. The whole thing out loud in the daylight, nothing to hide. 3 weeks. And then I'm going to ask you to dinner, and it's going to be the most ordinary, honest, uncomplicated thing in the world, because there won't be a single reason on earth for it not to be. Claire's eyes filled up and she laughed and she said, 3 weeks. 3 weeks. It turned out to be the longest 3 weeks of both their lives, and also somehow the happiest, because for the first time, neither of them was carrying the weight alone. He started at the new company. He picked Noah up from school on his very first Friday, and Noah was so surprised to see his dad's face in the pickup line at 3 o'clock that he ran the whole length of the sidewalk and slammed into him and asked if something was wrong, if somebody was sick, because the only time Dad ever came early was when something was wrong, and Ethan held his son on the sidewalk and told him, "No, buddy, nothing's wrong, this is just how it's going to be now." And Noah didn't quite believe him for about a week, and then he did, and watching his son learn to expect him became the single greatest thing Ethan Carter had ever earned. And Claire came to dinner. She came on a Saturday 3 weeks and 1 day after he'd resigned, and she didn't come as a CEO, and she didn't come with power, and she didn't come with a leather folder full of anyone's fraud. She came in jeans with a board game under her arm because Noah had mentioned once that he liked board games, and she rang the doorbell of the small apartment where 3 weeks of the strangest, hardest, most honest days of her life had begun. And when Ethan opened the door, she said, "I brought..." "Sorry." Noah said it was his favorite. "I should warn you both, I'm extremely competitive and I do not let children win." "Oh, good," Ethan said. "Neither does he." And Noah, hearing her voice, came skidding into the front room in his socks and stopped and looked at her and said, "You came back." "I came back," Claire said. "You said you would. That first morning. I told you to come back and you did." Noah considered this with the deep seriousness of a boy who had learned early that people don't always keep their promises. "Are you Dad's friend now?" And Ethan and Claire looked at each other over the boy's head, and Claire crouched down to Noah's level, and she said, "I'm hoping to be, if that's okay with you. Because here's the thing. Noah, your dad is one of the best people I've ever met in my whole life, and I don't have very many people, and I would really, really like it if the two of you would let me be around sometimes." Noah looked at her very carefully. "Do you know that 7 times 8 is 56? "I do. You taught me that. And you didn't let me win at math. I never will." Noah nodded slowly, like a man closing a difficult negotiation. "Okay," he said. "You can be Dad's friend, and you can be my friend too. But you have to be on my team for sorry because Dad always loses." "Deal," Claire said, and she shook his small hand very solemnly. And then she looked up at Ethan, and there were tears in her eyes, and a smile on her face, and Ethan Carter understood that the night 3 weeks ago hadn't changed his life because of a fire, or a fraud, or a boardroom. It had changed his life because 2 people who'd spent their whole lives alone had finally found the one place where they didn't have to be. They took it slow after that. They did it right. Claire came to dinner on Saturdays, and then on Wednesdays too, and then it wasn't a thing anyone counted anymore because she was just there, a part of the small, warm architecture of their lives. She never once tried to replace Sarah. She asked about her. Instead asked Ethan to tell her the stories he told Noah, learned the shape of the woman who'd come before her, and honored it. She kept the framed photo exactly where it was on the nightstand, and never suggested moving it. And Noah, who had grown up with a hole in his life, where a mother should have been slowly discovered that a person could love him without ever asking to take anyone's place. That Claire wasn't a replacement for what he'd lost, but an addition to what he had, and that his heart, it turned out, had room for both. Claire stayed CEO. She was better at it than ever, because something had come loose in her that day in the boardroom. The belief that she had to be perfect, that she had to be untouchable, that she had to carry everything alone. She started letting people see the real thing. It made her, to everyone's surprise, except Ethan's, a far better leader. The board that had nearly been captured by Gerald Voss became under a CEO who no longer hid one of the most trusted in the industry. And Eleanor Shaw, the 71-year-old who'd stood up and ended Voss with a single sentence, became something like a mentor to Claire, and eventually something like a friend, because Claire had learned finally how to have those. And a year and a half later, on an ordinary Saturday, in an apartment that had gotten a little bigger because they'd finally moved somewhere with room for all three of them, Ethan Carter got down on one knee in front of Claire Whitmore, while Noah in on the secret for a full week, and nearly bursting from the effort of keeping it, held the ring on a pillow he'd made in art class. Ethan didn't make a speech. He'd never been a speech kind of man. He just looked up at the woman he loved and said the truest thing he knew. 4 years ago, you told me not to let anyone talk me out of doing it my way, he said. So I'm not going to. Marry me, Claire. Not the CEO, not the Iron Queen, just you. The whole truth out loud in the daylight for the rest of our lives, with nothing left to hide from anyone ever again. And Claire Whitmore, who had once been unable to think of a single person in the world to call, who had thrown a glass against a wall in front of 300 people, who had believed her whole life that strength meant standing alone, looked down at the man who had stepped toward her, when everyone else stepped back, and at the little boy holding a lopsided pillow with a ring on it, and she understood at last that the strongest thing she'd ever done was let herself be loved. Yes, she said. God, yes. Noah cheered so loudly the neighbors heard it. And that was how it ended, and how it began. Not with power, and not with perfection, but with two lonely people and a bright-eyed boy, building a life on the one thing that had saved all three of them. The truth. Out loud. In the daylight. With nothing left to hide. Ethan Carter spent 11 years being the man nobody clapped for. But on the day he married Claire, in a small ceremony with Noah as the best man, and Eleanor Shaw crying in the front row, and Mrs. Alvarez from down the hall catching the bouquet, he finally understood that the applause had never been the point. The point was this, that a good man's worth is not measured by his paycheck or his title, or how many people notice him in a crowded room. It's measured by who he becomes when someone he loves is falling, and whether he steps toward them or away. Ethan Carter stepped toward her. He always would, and that in the end was